When I discovered my husband's therapist was actually his secret lover, he cried and pleaded for me to keep his affair hidden to protect his career, but I refused to keep his dirty secret. I'm Julia, 38F, and I found out about my husband's affair by accident. It started with something small, a charge on our bank statement from a place I didn't recognize. Mark, 40M, had always told me he was going to therapy, trying to work on himself and our marriage. But when I called the clinic to ask about the billing, they had no record of him as a patient. My stomach dropped, curious and horrified. I looked up the clinic's website, scanning through the list of therapists. And there she was, Emily, 36F, someone I vaguely remembered from a holiday party. She wasn't just his therapist, she was his lover. My hands shook as I tried to process the betrayal. For years, Mark had been lying, spinning tales of therapy sessions and self-improvement, all while sneaking around with his so-called therapist. I felt my heart race as all the pieces fell into place. The late nights, the sudden business trips, the moments he'd been distant, claiming he needed time alone to work on himself. I decided I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I would confront him that night, make him look me in the eyes and admit it. When he walked through the door, I barely recognized him as the man I'd married. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold. Mark looked at me, confused, then wary, as if he already knew what was coming. "What's going on?" he asked, feigning innocence. I held up the bank statement, my eyes locked on his. "Explain this," I demanded. He glanced at the paper, his face paling. "It's from your therapy clinic, the one that's never heard of you," I continued, my voice laced with anger. He stammered, his face draining of color. "Julia, I can explain," he started, but I could see the truth written all over him. "How long, Mark?" I cut in, not interested in his excuses. "How long have you been lying to me, pretending to go to therapy?" He hesitated, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for words. "A while," he finally admitted, his voice barely audible. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "How long?" I pressed, my voice rising. "A year? 2? He wouldn't meet my eyes. 3 years, he whispered. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. 3 years of lies, 3 years of him letting me believe he was working on himself, on our marriage. I fought back tears, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. "So all this time, you were just playing house, pretending to be a decent husband while you cheated with your therapist." He reached for my hand, but I recoiled, disgusted by his touch. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "Emily was just someone to talk to, someone who understood me when you didn't." I laughed, the sound bitter and harsh. "Understood you?" I repeated. "You're unbelievable. You've been lying to me for years, telling me you were working on us. But all you were doing was sneaking around behind my back." He tried to protest, but I wasn't done. "You've broken every promise, Mark. Every single one. And now you're standing here, asking me to understand." He looked away, guilt and shame etched on his face. Mark finally looked at me, his face filled with something that almost looked like remorse. "Julia, I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I never wanted it to go this far. I was lost, and Emily, she was just there for me in a way you couldn't be." His words stung, each one like a slap to the face. "You're really going to blame me for this?" I shot back, barely able to contain my rage. "You chose to betray me. You chose to lie over and over again." He tried to protest, but I cut him off. "Don't you dare put this on me. You're the one who destroyed our marriage." I watched as he sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "Please, Julia," he murmured, "you have to believe me. I never meant for you to find out like this." I laughed bitterly, feeling years of pent-up anger rise to the surface. "Oh, so I'm supposed to feel sorry for you now?" I asked, crossing my arms. "You've been living a lie for years, making a fool of me, and now you want my sympathy." He looked up, his eyes red. "I'll do anything to make this right," he whispered. "I'll go to real therapy, I'll cut things off with Emily. Just, please don't tell anyone. I'm begging you." His plea caught me off guard. "Don't tell anyone," I echoed, incredulous. "After everything you've done, your biggest concern is keeping this a secret." He nodded, desperation clear in his eyes. "If people find out, it'll ruin me. My career, my reputation. Everything." I felt a cold, hard anger settle in my chest. "So that's it," I said, my voice shaking. "All you care about is your image. You don't give a damn about what this has done to me." He reached for my hand again, but I pulled back. "You're pathetic, Mark. You've ruined everything, and now you're begging me to cover for you." I stormed out of the room, feeling like I couldn't breathe. My entire life had been shattered, and Mark was more concerned about his precious reputation than the devastation he'd caused. I went upstairs, locking myself in the bathroom as I tried to process everything. I thought about all the lies, all the times he'd looked me in the eye and told me he was working on us. I wanted to scream, to break something, but all I could do was sit there, numb. After a few minutes, I heard him knocking on the door. "Julia, please," he called softly. "We need to talk." I didn't respond, too furious to face him again. The next morning, I woke up feeling drained, like I'd been hollowed out. Mark was already up, pacing the kitchen, looking like he hadn't slept at all. "Julia, please, can we talk?" he asked as soon as I entered the room. I didn't answer, grabbing a cup of coffee and sitting down at the table. He sat across from me, his hands shaking. "I know I've messed up," he began, his voice cracking. "But I need you to keep this between us. If this gets out, I'll lose everything." I looked at him, feeling a surge of disgust. "Why should I care, Mark? You didn't care about losing me." He seemed taken aback by my response, like he hadn't considered that I might not be on his side. "I do care about you, Julia," he insisted. "I care about our life together." I shook my head, unable to believe the words coming out of his mouth. "You had years to show me that, Mark," I replied coldly. "Instead, you chose to lie and cheat. You chose to betray me over and over again." He looked down, his shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry," he whispered, but the words meant nothing to me. He destroyed everything, and now he wanted me to help him keep his dirty little secret. I couldn't stand to be around him anymore. I grabbed my keys and left, needing to clear my head, to put some distance between us. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind racing with thoughts of betrayal, of the years I'd wasted on a man who had lied to me so easily. Eventually, I found myself parked outside a friend's house. Amanda, 37F, someone I hadn't seen in a while but who had always been there for me in the past. I rang the doorbell, feeling the weight of everything crash down on me. When she opened the door and saw my face, she pulled me into a hug without a word. I finally let myself cry. After I told Amanda everything, she sat in stunned silence, processing the betrayal alongside me. "Julia, you can't keep this a secret for him," she said finally. "He doesn't deserve your protection. He didn't care about you, only himself." Her words echoed what I'd been feeling, but I still felt conflicted. "I don't know, Amanda," I replied, my voice shaky. "He's begging me not to tell anyone. He says it'll ruin his life." She gave me a hard look. "He's already ruined yours. You don't owe him anything." I knew she was right, but part of me hesitated. I'd spent so many years protecting him, standing by him. Breaking that habit wasn't easy. Over the next few days, Mark bombarded me with messages, pleading for my silence. He promised he'd end things with Emily, promised he'd go to real therapy, but I didn't believe a word of it. Every time I looked at him, I saw the lies, the years of deceit, and I knew I could never trust him again. He betrayed me in the worst way, and now he wanted me to protect him. It felt like a sick joke. I started sleeping in the guest room, avoiding him as much as possible, but he wouldn't let up. He was desperate, clinging to me as if my silence was the only thing keeping his life intact. One night, he cornered me in the hallway, his face twisted with desperation. "Julia, please," he begged, his voice breaking. "I'll do anything. Just don't tell anyone. I can't lose everything over this." I looked at him, feeling a surge of anger. "You should have thought about that before you started sneaking around with your therapist," I replied coldly. "You didn't care about losing me, did you?" He opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. "You made your choice, Mark. You chose her over me, over our marriage. Now do you want me to clean up your mess? I'm done protecting you." I walked away, leaving him standing there, defeated. The next day, I decided I needed to confront Emily. I wanted to look her in the eye and hear her side, to understand why she thought it was okay to destroy my marriage. I found her clinic and made an appointment under a fake name. When I walked into her office, she looked surprised but quickly regained her composure. "Julia," she said, forcing a smile. This is unexpected. I sat down, refusing to be intimidated. I know everything, I replied, my voice steady. I know about you and Mark. Her face paled, and she looked away, clearly uncomfortable. I'm sorry, she muttered, but I could see she didn't mean it. Sorry doesn't cut it, I said, my voice rising. You call yourself a therapist. You destroyed my life, my marriage. And for what? A fling? She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she whispered. Mark was going through a lot, and I was just there for him. I laughed bitterly, hearing the same excuse he'd given me. Is that supposed to make me feel better? That you were there for him while he lied to me? She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. I never meant to hurt you. I leaned forward, glaring at her. Well, you did, and I hope you're ready to deal with the consequences. I left her office, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. She'd looked terrified, and I hoped she felt every bit of the fear and guilt that I'd been carrying. But my anger wasn't gone. I knew that simply confronting her wasn't enough. Mark needed to face the consequences of his actions, and I wasn't going to protect him any longer. When I got home, I packed a bag ready to leave him and everything we'd built behind. I wasn't going to stay and pretend everything was okay. I wasn't going to let him manipulate me into silence. This was his mess, and he could deal with the fallout on his own. As I headed for the door, Mark appeared, looking panicked. Where are you going? He asked, his voice trembling. I can't do this anymore, I replied, my tone flat. I'm done covering for you, done pretending like any of this is okay. He reached out, grabbing my arm. Julia, please, don't leave. We can work through this. I'll end things with Emily, I swear. I shook my head, pulling away from his grasp. It's too late for that, Mark. You had your chance, and you threw it away. He looked desperate, but I no longer cared. I walked out, feeling a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. I spent the night at a friend's house, trying to wrap my head around everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the years I'd wasted on a man who didn't deserve me. I knew I couldn't go back, couldn't let him pull me into his web of lies again. I started thinking about my options, about how I could move forward without him. Part of me felt guilty, like I was abandoning the life we'd built, but I knew I had to do what was right for me. He'd made his choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. I was done living for him. I needed to live for myself. The next morning, Mark called me, his voice frantic. Julia, please come home. We can talk this out. We can fix this, he pleaded. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, but I stayed firm. There's nothing left to fix, Mark, I replied. You've broken everything. He started to cry, his desperation palpable, but it did nothing to move me. I can't lose you, he sobbed. Not like this. I closed my eyes, steeling myself. You already lost me when you chose her over our marriage. I hung up, blocking his number. I couldn't keep listening to his pleas, his empty promises. He'd made his bed, and now he could lie in it alone. Over the next few days, I began the process of separating our lives. I contacted a lawyer, moved my things out of the house, and leaned on my friends for support. Every step felt like ripping off a bandage, exposing old wounds, but I knew it was the only way forward. Mark tried reaching out through mutual friends, begging them to talk to me, to convince me to give him another chance. But they saw the pain he'd caused, the way he'd shattered me, and they refused to help him. It was a small comfort, knowing that the people I cared about stood by me. I wasn't alone in this fight. I had people who truly cared. Then, one day, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Emily. I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it, reading her neat cursive handwriting. She apologized, claimed she never meant for things to go this far. She talked about how much Mark had needed her, how she'd let her own feelings cloud her judgment. The letter was filled with excuses, justifications, and a pathetic plea for forgiveness. I laughed bitterly as I read it. She had no idea what forgiveness meant. She'd torn apart my life, and now she wanted absolution. I shredded the letter, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction as I watched it fall apart. I continued moving forward, refusing to let their actions hold me back. I threw myself into work, into rebuilding the life that was mine alone. The pain lingered, but it became easier to bear with each passing day. I started seeing a therapist, someone who could actually help me work through the mess Mark and Emily had left behind. I shared my story, the betrayal, the lies, and my therapist helped me find strength in my own resilience. I realized I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. I'd been through hell, but I was still standing. I was ready to reclaim my life, to live on my own terms. One afternoon, I ran into an old friend who hadn't heard about the split. She asked about Mark, assuming everything was fine, and I felt a surge of anger. I told her the truth, every ugly detail. I wasn't going to hide what he'd done, wasn't going to protect him from the consequences of his actions. She listened, horrified, and when I was done, she hugged me. "You deserve so much better," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. Her words felt like a balm, soothing the raw edges of my pain. I realized that by telling my story, I was reclaiming my power. I didn't owe Mark my silence. I owed myself the truth. As the weeks passed, rumors about Mark's affair began to spread. People started to piece together the truth, and his carefully crafted image began to crumble. I heard that he'd been questioned at work, that his reputation was taking a hit. Part of me felt guilty, but I pushed it aside. He'd chosen this path, chosen to lie and cheat, and now he was facing the consequences. I wasn't going to feel sorry for him. He'd built his life on lies, and now those lies were coming back to haunt him. I watched from a distance, feeling a strange sense of relief. He was finally paying for the pain he'd caused. Then, one evening, I received a call from Mark's mother. She wanted to meet, to talk about everything that had happened. I agreed, feeling a mixture of dread and curiosity. When we met, she took my hands in hers, her face filled with sadness. "I'm so sorry for what my son did to you," she said, her voice trembling. "He was a fool to throw away someone as wonderful as you." I felt a lump in my throat, but I managed a small smile. "Thank you," I replied. "But he made his choices." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I hope you find happiness, Julia. You deserve it." Her words felt like a blessing, a small piece of closure. As I walked away from that meeting, I realized I was finally letting go of the anger. Mark had hurt me, but I wasn't going to let him have power over my future. I was done carrying the weight of his betrayal. I started focusing on myself, rediscovering the things I loved. I traveled, reconnected with friends, and even picked up painting, something I hadn't done in years. My life was beginning to feel like mine again, free from the lies and deceit that had once consumed me. I wasn't healed, not entirely, but I was on my way. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. Then, one day, Mark showed up at my door, looking defeated. "Julia," he said softly, "I've lost everything. Please, can we talk?" I looked at him, feeling nothing but pity. He was a shell of the man I'd once loved, broken by his own choices. "There's nothing left to say, Mark," I replied, my voice calm. "You made your bed. Now you have to lie in it." He tried to protest, but I held up a hand. "I'd moved on," I said firmly. "I'm building a new life, and you're not part of it." He looked at me, devastated, but I closed the door, shutting him out for good. I was done with him. As I continued to rebuild my life, I found a sense of peace I hadn't known before. I was no longer defined by my marriage, by the betrayal that had once shattered me. I was free to live on my own terms, to find happiness in ways I hadn't imagined. I started dating again, cautiously opening myself up to new possibilities. I was nervous, but I knew I couldn't let Mark's actions keep me from finding love again. I'd been through hell, but I'd come out stronger. I was learning to trust myself, to believe in my own worth, and I knew I deserved a future filled with joy and respect. Months later, I heard that Mark had lost his job, that the rumors of his affair had finally caught up with him. Part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. He'd spent years lying, deceiving, and now he was reaping what he'd sown. I didn't celebrate his downfall, but I didn't mourn it either. I simply let it be, a reminder of the choices he'd made. I was too busy building my own life to care about his. I had new friends, new passions, and a renewed sense of purpose. Mark was just a chapter in my past, a painful lesson I'd learned, but he no longer had any hold over me. Then, one day, I received an unexpected email. It was from Emily. She apologized again, but this time it felt genuine. She talked about how she'd lost her license, how she was trying to rebuild her life after the scandal. I read her words carefully, feeling a strange mix of emotions. I didn't forgive her, not entirely, but I felt a sense of closure. She'd faced her own consequences, and now she was trying to move forward. I replied briefly, wishing her well but making it clear that I didn't want any further contact. She was a part of my past, but I had no interest in letting her back into my life. As I sent that email, I realized I was finally free. Free from the lies, the betrayal, the years of pain I'd carried. I was living my life on my own terms, surrounded by people who valued and respected me. I no longer felt the need to prove anything to anyone. I was happy, truly happy, for the first time in a long time. I'd built something new, something strong, and I knew I would never let anyone take that away from me again. Mark and Emily were just memories now, reminders of what I'd overcome, but they no longer defined me. I was ready to embrace the future, to live fully and unapologetically. Then, one day, I met someone. His name was Alex, 41M, and he was kind, genuine, everything Mark hadn't been. We started off slowly, getting to know each other, building trust brick by brick. I told him about my past, about the pain I'd been through, and he listened with empathy, never judging, never questioning. It felt like a fresh start, a chance to build something real. With him, I found a sense of peace, a happiness I hadn't known before. I realized that I didn't need to carry the weight of my past any longer. I was free to love, to trust, to believe in the goodness of people once again. As Alex and I grew closer, I felt myself letting go of the last remnants of anger and resentment. I no longer cared about what Mark was doing, no longer felt the need to keep tabs on him. He was a part of my past, but he no longer had power over my present or my future. I was too busy building something beautiful, something that was mine alone. I'd been through betrayal, through heartbreak, but I'd come out the other side stronger, more resilient. I was finally free to live a life filled with love, with laughter, with everything I'd once thought I'd lost. I was ready to embrace the future. One evening, Alex and I were out with friends, laughing and enjoying ourselves, when I saw Mark. He looked haggard, defeated, a shadow of the man he'd once been. Our eyes met briefly, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of recognition, of regret, but I simply smiled, turning back to Alex, focusing on the joy of the moment. Mark had no place in my life anymore. I was free from his lies, from the pain he'd caused, and I wasn't going to let him steal another moment of my happiness. I held Alex's hand, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. I was exactly where I was meant to be. As time went on, I found myself looking back on my past with a sense of detachment. Mark and Emily were just faded memories, reminders of the lessons I'd learned, but they no longer held any power over me. I'd built something new, something strong, and I knew I was ready for whatever the future held. I was living for myself, for my own happiness, and I knew I would never let anyone take that away from me. I was free to live fully, to love deeply, to embrace the beauty of life without fear. I was ready to step into the future, unburdened by the ghosts of my past. Then, one day, I heard that Mark had moved away, that he'd left the city to start over somewhere new. I felt a sense of relief, knowing that I would never have to see him again, never have to be reminded of the pain he'd caused. I hoped, for his sake, that he'd learned from his mistakes, but I no longer cared. I had my own life to live, my own happiness to pursue, and I was ready to move forward without his shadow hanging over me. I'd survived his lies, his betrayal, and I'd come out the other side stronger, more resilient. I was finally free to live on my own terms. As I closed that chapter of my life for good, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known before. I was surrounded by people who cared about me, who valued me, and I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. I'd been through betrayal, through heartbreak, but I'd emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to live a life that was filled with love and honesty. Mark and Emily were just memories now, reminders of the lessons I'd learned, but they no longer had power over me. I was free to build a future that was mine alone, a future that was filled with hope, with joy, with everything I deserved. And so, I moved forward, embracing the future with open arms. I was no longer haunted by the past, no longer burdened by the pain of betrayal. I had found my own strength, my own resilience, and I knew I would never let anyone take that away from me. I was living my life on my own terms, free to love, to laugh, to find happiness in every moment. I was finally free to live fully, to embrace the beauty of life without fear. I had survived, I had thrived, and I was ready for whatever came next. My story was just beginning, and I was the one writing it now.